Admiral Sarah Chun stood at the observation deck of Harmony Station, watching ships from 47 different worlds dock at the massive spaceport. The sight still amazed her after all these years. Creatures that had fought wars for thousands of years now worked together, traded together, and lived together in peace. It was 2587. Exactly 200 years since humanity had joined the Galactic Concordat. Sarah remembered the stories her grandmother had told her about that first contact. The aliens had arrived at Earth with a simple message: join us, but first, prove you can be civilized. The test had been hard but fair. Humanity had to give up their weapons of war, their nuclear arsenals, their battle fleets. They had to promise to solve problems with words, not violence. They had to show they could control their aggressive nature. Earth had agreed without hesitation. After centuries of wars, pollution, and suffering, the chance to join a peaceful galactic community seemed like a dream come true. Humans dismantled their military forces and built diplomatic fleets instead. They traded their warships for rescue vessels and their soldiers for peacekeepers. The Galactic Concordat welcomed them with open arms. The older species were impressed by humanity's willingness to change. The Zephyrians, who had founded the Concordat 3,000 years ago, called humans the wise children who had learned from their mistakes. Sarah's own family history was tied to this transformation. Her great-grandfather had been a general in the old Earth military. Her grandfather had become one of the first human diplomats. Her father had designed the peaceful ships that now protected trade routes across the galaxy. And Sarah herself commanded the diplomatic defense fleet, 12 ships built only to protect and rescue, never to attack. The fleet was humanity's pride. Each ship carried medical bays instead of weapon batteries, rescue pods instead of missiles, and communication arrays instead of targeting systems. When conflicts arose between other species, human ships arrived not to fight, but to help everyone find a better solution. This approach had worked better than anyone expected. Humans discovered they had a special talent for understanding other species. Their history of overcoming their own violent nature made them perfect mediators. While the Zephyrians were too proud and the Feltar too logical, humans could find the middle ground that worked for everyone. Harmony Station was the symbol of human success in the galaxy. Built at the edge of Concordat space, it housed the best diplomatic academy in known space. Young beings from dozens of worlds came here to learn from human teachers. They studied conflict resolution, cultural understanding, and peaceful negotiation. Sarah watched a group of young diplomats walk past the observation window. There was her own daughter, Maria, leading a discussion between a Zephyrian cadet and a Thorian student. The two species had fought a bitter war only 50 years ago, but here their children learned to work together. The station buzzed with activity as preparations continued for the Festival of Confluence. In just 3 days, representatives from every Concordat world would gather here to celebrate 200 years of human membership. It would be the largest peaceful gathering in galactic history. Sarah smiled as she remembered her first visit to this station as a young officer. She had been so nervous, representing humanity among beings who had traveled the stars for millennia. But the older species had been patient with her, teaching her their customs and sharing their wisdom. The Zephyrians had been especially welcoming. Their ambassador Veltar Zix had become like a mentor to her. He taught her the ancient Concordat traditions and helped her understand the delicate balance that kept peace in the galaxy. Under his guidance, Sarah learned that true strength came not from the power to destroy, but from the wisdom to protect. Over the years, humanity had proven worthy of the trust placed in them. Human medical teams saved lives on worlds ravaged by disease. Human engineers built bridges between cultures that had barely spoken for centuries. Human teachers spread the gift of empathy across the galaxy. But Sarah sometimes wondered if they had given up too much. When pirate attacks increased in the Outer Rim, human ships could only call for help from the Zephyrian fleet. When tensions rose between the Feltar and the Thorians, humans could only mediate while hoping that older, more powerful species would enforce any agreements. The Concordat's hierarchy was clear, even if it was never spoken aloud. The Zephyrians, Feltar, and Thorians were the real powers, the species with planet-killing weapons and stellar destroyers. Humans were the helpers, the counselors, the ones who cleaned up after the important decisions were made. Sarah pushed these thoughts away as she prepared for the evening security briefing. The Festival of Confluence would bring together beings from across the galaxy, including some who still harbored old grudges. Her job was to make sure everyone stayed safe, and the celebration went smoothly. Her communication device chimed with an incoming message from Veltar Zix. The old Zephyrian's holographic form appeared, his scaled face showing what humans had learned to recognize as a smile. Admiral Chun, I trust the preparations proceed well? Everything's on schedule, Ambassador. We're honored to host such an important event. The honor is humanity's to claim, my dear friend. Your species has brought a gift to our galaxy that we had almost forgotten. The belief that peace is not just the absence of war, but the presence of understanding. Sarah felt a warmth at his words. This was why humanity had made the right choice 200 years ago. This was why giving up their weapons had been worth it. In a universe full of species that had known only strength through violence, humans had shown there was another way. As she closed the communication, Sarah looked out at the stars surrounding Harmony Station. Somewhere out there, human ships patrolled trade routes and rescued travelers in distress. Human diplomats worked to prevent conflicts before they could begin. Human teachers inspired the next generation to choose cooperation over conquest. Humanity had found its place in the galaxy, and it was exactly where they belonged. 3 days later, everything would change forever. The Festival of Confluence began like every great celebration in Concordat history. Harmony Station sparkled with lights from 47 different worlds. Music from 100 cultures mixed in the air. The smell of foods that no single planet could produce filled the corridors. Sarah, Chun watched from the command center as ships arrived every hour. Diplomatic vessels, cultural exchange ships, and transport craft carrying families who wanted to witness this historic moment. The station's population had swelled to over 150,000 beings. Her daughter Maria was somewhere in the crowd, probably showing visitors the peace gardens or discussing philosophy in the meditation centers. Sarah had seen her that morning, excited about presenting her research on interspecies communication to the full assembly. Ambassador Veltar Zix had arrived the day before with a delegation of senior Zephyrian officials. They seemed different somehow, more serious than usual. When Sarah asked about it, Veltar explained they were concerned about new intelligence reports. He didn't give details, but asked if human security teams had noticed anything unusual. Sarah had run extra scans and found nothing. Space around Harmony Station was busy but peaceful. Trading vessels, passenger ships, and the usual traffic of a major hub. Her 12 defensive ships maintained their patrols, ready to help anyone in need. The first day of the festival passed without incident. Species that had once been enemies danced together in the great halls. Children from different worlds played games that needed no common language. Scientists shared discoveries that benefited everyone. On the second day, the Feltar delegation presented their gift to humanity, a crystal sculpture that represented the network of peace humans had helped weave across the galaxy. The Thorian chorus performed songs of gratitude. The whole station felt like one giant family celebrating together. But something felt wrong to Sarah. Her years as a diplomat had taught her to read the subtle signs that others missed. The Zephyrian delegation was too quiet, too serious for a celebration. Some of the Feltar seemed nervous. Even the normally loud Thorians whispered more than usual. On the morning of the third day, Sarah requested a private meeting with Veltar Zix. She found him in the Zephyrian quarters, standing alone and looking out at the stars. "Ambassador, is there something you need to tell me?" Veltar turned, and for the first time in years, Sarah could not read his expression. His usual warmth seemed forced. "Admiral Chun, you have been a true friend to our species and to the Concordat. I want you to remember that, whatever happens." Before Sarah could ask what he meant, alarms began screaming throughout the station. A communicator exploded with panicked reports from her patrol ships. "Admiral, massive fleet approaching from Vector 7. Count is, dear God, over 200 ships." Sarah ran to the command center, Veltar following behind. The main display showed the approaching fleet, and Sarah's blood went cold. These were not the peaceful vessels of the Concordat. These were warships, battle cruisers, and dreadnoughts that she had only seen in military databases. Zephyrian ships led the formation, but Sarah recognized Veltar and Thorian designs as well. The three most powerful species in the Concordat were approaching, Harmony Station with enough firepower to destroy a solar system. "This must be a mistake," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Veltar, what is this?" The old Zephyrian's face showed something Sarah had never seen before: shame. Intelligence reports suggested that humanity was secretly developing prohibited weapons. The Council of Three voted for immediate action to protect the Concordat. What reports? What weapons? "We've never hidden anything." But even as Sarah spoke, she realized the truth. This was not about weapons. This was about power. About three ancient species deciding that humanity had grown too influential, too important, too dangerous to their control. The attacking fleet opened fire without warning. The first weapons to hit were sonic disruptors, designed to shatter the station's communication systems. Then came plasma cannons that tore through the outer rings where families lived and children played. Sarah watched in horror as sections of Harmony Station exploded into space. Her defensive ships moved to intercept, but they were built for rescue, not war. Their shields held for precious minutes while they tried to evacuate civilians. But they could not fight back against weapons that violated every treaty the Concordat had ever signed. "All ships, focus on evacuation," Sarah ordered. "Get as many people out as possible." But the attackers had planned for this too. As soon as evacuation pods launched, fighters swarmed them like predators. Sarah watched escape pods full of children and elderly beings get destroyed by weapons fire. The attackers were not just trying to eliminate a threat. They were sending a message. The medical center exploded in a ball of fire. The diplomatic quarters, where dozens of species lived together, were torn apart by missiles. The peace gardens where Sarah's daughter had played as a child became a field of floating debris. Sarah tried to reach Maria on her personal communicator, but there was only static. The command center shook as another wave of weapons fire struck home. One of her patrol ships, the Peaceful Dawn, made a desperate run to shield the evacuation zone. Captain Harrison and his crew knew they were flying into certain death, but they held position until the last civilian transport cleared the station. Sarah watched their ship break apart under enemy fire, taking the lives of 87 human officers who had sworn to protect others. The attack lasted 6 hours. When it ended, Harmony Station was a tomb floating in space, twisted metal and frozen air marking the death of humanity's greatest achievement. Of the 150,000 beings who had been aboard, fewer than 30,000 survived. Sarah's own ship, the Diplomatic Hope, was crippled but intact. As rescue operations began, she walked through corridors filled with the injured and dying. Species that had celebrated together the day before now bled together in the medical base. She found Maria in the wreckage of the cultural center, crushed under debris while trying to shield a group of young Zephyrian students. Her daughter's last act had been to save the children of the very species that had ordered her death. As Sarah held Maria's body, she realized that everything humanity had believed about civilization, about peace, about the goodness of other species, had been a lie. They had traded their strength for acceptance, their weapons for friendship, their power for the illusion of safety. And in return, the galaxy had murdered their children. Ambassador Veltar Zix found her there, tears streaming down his scaled face. Sarah, I tried to stop this. I voted against the action. You must believe me. Sarah looked up at him, and something died in her eyes. Get away from me. Within hours, reports began spreading across Concordat space. The official statement was brief. Regrettable miscommunication led to unfortunate incident at Harmony Station. Investigation ongoing. Humanity may have provoked defensive response through suspicious activities. The message was clear. The massacre would be covered up, forgotten, explained away. Humanity would be blamed for their own slaughter. But as Sarah stood in the ruins of everything her people had built, she made a promise to her dead daughter and to the thousands of others who had died believing in peace. The galaxy was about to learn that there were worse things than human violence. There was human vengeance. The emergency session of the Galactic Concordat took place on Centaurus Prime, the oldest neutral world in known space. Representatives from every member species gathered in the ancient assembly hall. But the mood was different than any meeting in recorded history. Admiral Sarah Chun stood at the human delegations table, still wearing her battle-damaged uniform. She had refused to change clothes, wanting everyone to see the burn marks and bloodstains from Harmony Station. Behind her sat the survivors of her fleet. Officers who had watched their comrades die protecting people who would never thank them. The Zephyrian speaker, High Council Mordak Zess, called the session to order with his ceremonial staff. He was younger than Veltar Zix and lacked the ambassador's gentle manner. His voice carried the arrogance of a species that had ruled the galaxy for 3 millennia. The Council recognizes this gathering to address the unfortunate incident at Harmony Station. We deeply regret the loss of life, but intelligence indicated that humanity was developing prohibited weapons technology in violation of Concordat law. Sarah remained silent as Mordak displayed the evidence, fabricated sensor readings, false testimony from paid informants, and computer models that supposedly showed human ships carrying illegal weapons. It was impressive work, probably prepared over months or years. The Feltar representative, a tall insectoid creature named Quicktar-7, added their support. The collective's analysis confirms dangerous human activities. Our response was measured and necessary to protect Concordat security. The Thorian delegate, General Brock Ironhand, slammed his massive fist on the table. The Empire stands with our allies. Humanity has grown too bold, too ambitious. They needed to remember their place. One by one, the other species voiced their positions. Most supported the 3 major powers, either from fear or from bribes. A few brave delegates called for an investigation, but they were quickly shouted down. The message was clear. Humanity had brought this destruction on themselves. Finally, Mordak turned to the human delegation. Admiral Chun, the Concordat offers humanity a chance to respond to these serious allegations. We hope you will accept responsibility and work with us to prevent future misunderstandings. Sarah stood slowly, her movements controlled and precise. She walked to the center of the chamber, where a holocaster would broadcast her words to every world in Concordat space. For a moment, she simply stood there, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, almost conversational. But every human in the chamber felt their spine straighten at her tone. 200 years ago, you came to our world and asked us to prove we could be civilized. We believed you wanted peace, so we gave up our weapons. We believed you valued life, so we became healers and teachers. We believed you honored trust, so we opened our hearts to you. Sarah's voice grew harder. Yesterday, you murdered our children. You destroyed our greatest achievement. You killed beings who had devoted their lives to serving others. And now you stand here, in this ancient hall of justice, and you lie about why you did it. Mordok started to interrupt, but Sarah continued without acknowledging him. You want to know about weapons? Let me tell you about weapons. For 200 years, you thought we were weak because we chose not to fight. You thought we were stupid because we trusted you. You thought we were helpless because we built hospitals instead of battleships. A cold smile crossed Sarah's face. You were wrong about everything. She touched a control on her wrist, and the chamber's main display activated. Images filled the space above their heads. Human colonies across the galaxy. Research stations in dead space. Mining operations on distant asteroids. What you call mining equipment can build a battle fleet in 36 hours. What you call research stations have been perfecting weapons that don't exist in your databases. What you call peaceful trade ships carry enough firepower to crack a moon. The images changed, showing the internal structure of human vessels. Where other species expected to see cargo holds and passenger compartments, they saw weapon bays, military factories, and technologies that made their own fleets look ancient. We never stopped being warriors, Sarah said. We just got better at hiding it. Every human diplomat learned to read your weaknesses. Every human engineer studied your technology. Every human scientist mapped your biology, your psychology, your fears. The chamber erupted in angry voices. But Sarah's next words cut through the noise like a blade. You killed our children because you thought we were defenseless. You chose war because you believed we would not fight back. You made the greatest mistake in galactic history. Sarah looked directly at Mordok, and the Zephyrian leader actually stepped backward at what he saw in her eyes. Earth hereby withdraws from all concordat treaties and protocols. We no longer recognize your authority, your laws, or your right to exist as you have. The age of human restraint is over. She touched her communicator, and her words were transmitted across human space. On 1,000 worlds, in hidden bases and disguised facilities, humans began to move. Ships that had pretended to be civilian vessels dropped their false hulls. Weapons that had been labeled as research equipment came online. Soldiers who had posed as diplomats picked up guns they had hidden for decades. You want to see what humanity looks like when we stop being civilized? Sarah asked. You're about to find out. The Zephyrian delegate found his voice. This is madness. Humanity cannot stand against the combined might of the Concordat. You are one species among 47. Sarah's smile became something that would haunt the nightmares of every being in that chamber. You're right. We are one species. But we're the species that survived ice ages and nuclear wars, that conquered our own violent nature, and then learned to hide it so well that you forgot what we really were. We're the species that you just taught that civilization is a luxury we can no longer afford. She began walking toward the exit, her officers falling in behind her. When this session ends, you will return to your worlds and prepare for what's coming. Some of you will choose to surrender immediately. That would be wise. At the chamber's exit, Sarah turned back one final time. My daughter died yesterday, trying to save Zephyrian children from the bombs you dropped on them. She believed in peace, in understanding, in the dream that different species could live together without fear. You murdered her for that belief. Sarah's voice became a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the chamber. I love my daughter more than I love peace. And I'm going to show you the difference. As the human delegation left, emergency alarms began sounding across Centaurus Prime. In orbit, human ships that had been docked peacefully for years, suddenly revealed hidden weapons and began targeting Concordat vessels. The galaxy was about to remember why humanity had once been considered too dangerous for civilized company. And this time, there would be no restraint. Within hours, the first Zephyrian colonies went dark. Not destroyed, simply cut off, isolated. Their communications severed and their defenses disabled by technologies the Concordat had never seen before. The war had begun, but it would not be fought by the rules any of them understood that it would be. Fought by human rules, and humans had spent 2 centuries learning how to break their enemies without becoming monsters. They were about to prove they had learned well. The war that followed was unlike anything in galactic history. It was not armies clashing on battlefields or fleets meeting in space. It was something far more terrifying. It was humans applying 2 centuries of careful study to the systematic destruction of their enemies. Admiral Sarah Chun commanded the campaign from the rebuilt Harmony Station, now bristling with weapons that made Concordat technology look primitive. The station's memorial garden had been replaced with a war room, where human strategists planned operations with cold precision. The first target was the Zephyrian hegemony, the species that had planned the massacre. But humans did not attack their military bases or industrial centers. Instead, they struck at something far more precious. The Zephyrians' pride. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a former cultural attaché, stood before a holographic map of Zephyrian space. For decades, she had studied their psychology while posing as a harmless academic. Now her knowledge became a weapon. Zephyrians measure worth through ancient bloodlines, she explained to Sarah's staff. Their entire society is built on genetic purity and ancestral honor. They keep detailed records going back 12,000 years. Sarah nodded. And those records are stored where? The sacred archive on their homeworld. It's more than a library. It's the foundation of their civilization. Every Zephyrian's social status depends on proving their family's noble history. The attack came not with bombs or missiles, but with something far worse: truth. Human cyber warfare specialists, guided by cultural experts, infiltrated the sacred archive and began revealing uncomfortable facts. They showed that many of the most noble Zephyrian families were actually descended from criminals and outcasts. They proved that bloodlines had been falsified for centuries, but the humans went further. They began releasing genetic data that showed how different Zephyrian families were actually related. Families that had feuded for millennia discovered they shared ancestors. Noble houses learned they descended from the servant classes they despised. The result was chaos. Zephyrian society, built on 10,000 years of careful lies about genetic superiority, collapsed in weeks. Noble families turned on each other as ancient feuds erupted into civil wars. The government spent more time investigating genealogical claims than fighting the human fleet. Meanwhile, human ships appeared throughout Zephyrian space, not to attack, but to broadcast. They transmitted the genetic records of every Zephyrian who had participated in the Harmony Station massacre to the species that Zephyrians had historically enslaved and oppressed. The Corvan resistance, brutalized by Zephyrians for centuries, suddenly knew exactly which individuals had ordered the destruction of their worlds. The Thunder refugee fleets, driven from their homes by Zephyrian expansion, learned the names and locations of everyone responsible for their suffering. Zephyrian colonies found themselves surrounded not by human ships, but by the fleets of species seeking justice for old wounds. The humans simply watched as decades of suppressed anger exploded across Zephyrian space. The Feltar Collective faced a different kind of assault. Their strength lay in their hive mind communication network, a psychic connection that linked every member of their species across the galaxy. It was their greatest advantage and their most carefully guarded secret. But humans had been studying that network for 50 years. Dr. James Park, a former peace negotiator, had spent decades learning Feltar telepathic patterns while helping resolve conflicts between individual, collective members and other species. The network operates on quantum frequencies, he explained to Sarah. They think it's unhackable because it's biological, not technological. But biology follows rules, just like any other system. The human attack began with whispers. Fake thoughts, carefully crafted to match Feltar mental patterns, began appearing in their network. At first, they were subtle. Doubts about leadership decisions, questions about resource allocation, concerns about military strategy. The Feltar collective prided itself on perfect unity. But humans began introducing the one thing their society could not handle: disagreement. False thoughts spread through their network like a virus, creating confusion and conflict where none had existed before. Individual Feltar began receiving contradictory orders. Some were told to attack human positions, while others received commands to retreat. Military units received conflicting intelligence about enemy movements. Supply convoys were directed to empty space, while colonies were told help was coming that never arrived. The collective's leaders tried to shut down sections of the network, but that only made things worse. Feltar, who were cut off from the hive mind, became confused and panicked. Those still connected couldn't tell which thoughts were real and which were human-generated deceptions. Within months, the perfect unity of the Feltar collective shattered into thousands of isolated groups, each convinced that the others had been compromised by human infiltration. The Thorian Empire received perhaps the cruelest treatment of all. Thorians valued strength above all else, and their massive battle fleets were the source of their identity and power. They had spent millennia perfecting the art of space warfare, building ships that could destroy planets and fleets that had conquered dozens of systems. But for 50 years, human maintenance crews had been working on those fleets. Captain Lisa Rodriguez had overseen the program while posing as a harmless engineer, helping to improve Thorian technology. "We didn't sabotage their ships," she reported to Sarah with grim satisfaction. "We improved them. Every modification we made actually enhanced their performance." The Thorians loved our work so much they insisted we handle all major repairs and upgrades. Sarah understood immediately. "And now?" "Now every ship in their fleet has human-designed components that respond to human control codes. They don't even know we're there until we decide to turn their own weapons against them." The revelation came during the Battle of Rigel 7, when a massive Thorian fleet moved to crush a human colony. As the Thorian dreadnoughts prepared to open fire, their own weapon systems turned and began targeting each other. Thorian captains watched in horror as their ships refused to obey commands. Their engines shut down without warning, and their life support systems began failing. The mighty Thorian fleet became helpless prey for human vessels that appeared out of nowhere, moving faster and hitting harder than anything in Concordat databases. But the humans did not destroy the Thorian ships. Instead, they forced them to broadcast surrender messages to every Thorian colony in the Empire. The species that had built their identity on never backing down from a fight watched, their greatest heroes begging human commanders for mercy. The psychological impact was devastating. Thorian culture began collapsing as their people realized their vaunted military might was an illusion. Rebellions broke out across the Empire, as subject species saw their oppressors revealed as weak and dependent on technology they did not understand. As the three major Concordat powers crumbled, the remaining species faced a choice: surrender or share their fate. One by one, they chose survival over pride. The Volok republics offered to serve as human allies. The Christian Confederacy opened their borders to human administrators. Even the proud Altarian Federation agreed to accept human oversight of their military forces. Sarah watched the reports from her command center. feeling no satisfaction in the victories. Each success brought her closer to her goal, but it could not bring back the dead or heal the wounds of betrayal. "Admiral," her aide reported, "the Zephyrian High Council is requesting terms for surrender." Sarah nodded. "Tell them we'll discuss terms when every being responsible for Harmony Station has been handed over for trial. Until then, their homeworld remains under quarantine." The aide hesitated. "Ma'am, they're asking about their civilian population. Many worlds are experiencing food shortages due to the trade disruptions." "Then they should have thought about that before they chose to murder our civilians," Sarah replied coldly. "War has consequences. They taught us that lesson at Harmony Station." As reports continued arriving from across the galaxy, Sarah realized that humanity had accomplished something unprecedented. They had defeated 3 galactic superpowers without becoming conquerors themselves. They had not seized territory or enslaved populations. Instead, they had removed their enemy's ability to threaten anyone ever again. The galaxy was being reshaped, but it was not becoming a human empire. It was becoming something new, something that had never existed before. A community based on honest acknowledgement of power rather than polite fiction about peace. And at the center of it all, Sarah Chun stood surrounded by the ghosts of those who had died believing in a gentler way. She had avenged them, but she wondered if they would approve of the methods she had used. The war was almost over. Now came the harder task, building something better from the ashes of what had been destroyed. 3 years after the Battle of Rigel 7 marked the end of the Concordat War, Admiral Sarah Chun stood in the Memorial Garden of New Harmony Station. The rebuilt facility orbited in the same location as the original, but everything about it was different. Where the old station had been a symbol of naive hope, the new one represented something harder and more honest. Its corridors were patrolled by armed guards from a dozen species. Its docking bays could convert to weapon platforms in minutes. Its beautiful gardens grew around, defensive bunkers that could protect thousands in case of attack. Sarah paused before the memorial wall that listed the names of everyone who had died in the massacre. Her daughter Maria's name was carved near the top, along with the Zephyrian children she had died trying to save. Below their names was a simple inscription: "They died believing in peace. They live on and are promised to never again mistake kindness for weakness." The galaxy had changed in ways that few could have predicted. The Galactic Concordat was gone, dissolved in the chaos that followed humanity's victory. In its place stood the Terran Protectorate, but it was not an empire in any traditional sense. Captain Elena Vasquez, now Director of Interspecies Relations, approached Sarah with a daily briefing. Her transformation from cultural attaché to intelligence operative to diplomatic leader reflected humanity's own evolution. "The weekly sector reports, Admiral," Elena said, handing Sarah a datapad. "Compliance is holding steady at 97% across all monitored systems." Sarah scanned the numbers. Zephyrian space was quiet, their former empire now divided into dozens of small republics that spent more time rebuilding than plotting conquest. The Feltar Collective had split into 17 independent colonies, each developing its own culture without the crushing weight of hive mind uniformity. The Thorian worlds were learning to solve problems through negotiation rather than violence, guided by human advisors who had once been their prisoners. "Any resistance movements?" Sarah asked. 3 small groups in the outer rim, but nothing organized. Most species seemed to prefer the new arrangement to the old chaos. The Terran Protectorate operated on a simple principle: honest acknowledgement of power relationships. Every species that joined agreed to certain basic rules: no weapons of mass destruction, no slavery, no genocide, no aggressive wars. In return, they received protection, trade opportunities, and the right to govern themselves however they chose. But unlike the old Concordat, there were no pretenses about equality. Humanity was the dominant military power, and they made no apologies for it. Human fleets patrolled the major space routes. Human bases monitored potential threats, and human arbitrators settled disputes that member species could not resolve themselves. The difference was that everyone knew where they stood. There were no ancient hierarchies hidden behind diplomatic language, no secret councils making decisions for entire civilizations. Power was visible, accountable, and used openly. Sarah walked to her office, where Ambassador Veltar Zix waited for their weekly meeting. The old Zephyrian had aged considerably in the past 3 years, but he had become one of humanity's most valuable allies in building the new order. "Admiral Chun, thank you for seeing me," he said, rising as she entered. "Please, Veltar, what brings you here today?" The former Zephyrian diplomat had requested exile from his homeworld after the war, unable to live among those who had supported the massacre. Sarah had granted him asylum and eventually given him a position helping to negotiate the terms of Zephyrian reconstruction. "I wanted to discuss the proposal for the youth exchange program," he said. "Several Zephyrian republics have requested permission to send students to human academies." Sarah nodded. It was a positive development. In the early days after the war, most species had been too afraid or angry to consider cultural exchange. But as the new system proved stable and fair, many were beginning to see opportunities for cooperation. "What's your recommendation?" "I believe we should approve it with conditions. The students must study human history, including the events that led to the war. They need to understand why the old system failed." Sarah agreed. Education was key to preventing future conflicts. The new academies taught honest history, including humanity's own violent past and the mistakes that had led to the massacre at Harmony Station. Students learned that peace was not a natural state, but something that required constant work and vigilance. After Veltar left, Sarah received a call from Earth. President Martinez appeared on her screen, looking tired but satisfied. "Sarah, the Council has approved your request for the new fleet expansion. 12 more diplomatic defense ships and 6 heavy cruisers." "Thank you, Mr. President. The Outer Rim sectors still have some unstable elements. Any word from the Andorian rebels?" Sarah shook her head. "They're still demanding complete withdrawal of human forces from their system. I've offered them the standard deal. They can govern themselves as long as they follow basic protectorate law. They're not interested." The Andorian situation was one of several ongoing challenges. Some species simply could not accept human leadership, even when it was exercised with a light touch. These groups continued to resist, forcing occasional military actions that Sarah wished could be avoided. But she had learned that some conflicts could not be resolved through peaceful means. The old Concordat had taught her that trying to avoid all violence sometimes led to much worse violence later. Better to deal with threats quickly and decisively than to let them fester. As the day ended, Sarah made her way to the observation deck where she had stood 3 years ago, watching ships arrive for what was supposed to be a celebration of peace. Now, she watched a different kind of traffic. Human patrol ships returning from their routes, trading vessels carrying goods between worlds that had once been enemies, and transport ships bringing refugees to new homes where they could live without fear. The scene was busier than the old days, but also more honest. The ships were openly armed, their crews trained for combat as well as diplomacy. The space stations that served as waypoints were clearly defensive positions as well as trading posts. No one pretended that peace was maintained through goodwill alone. Sarah's personal communicator chimed with a message from Dr. James Park, who now oversaw the integration of former Feltar colonies into the Protectorate structure. "Admiral, I wanted you to know that Colony 7 just voted to accept full membership. They're requesting human advisors for their transition to individual governance." Sarah smiled at the news. Colony 7 had been one of the most resistant Feltar groups, clinging to their hive mind traditions even after the collective's collapse. Their willingness to adapt was a sign that the new system was working. As she prepared to leave the observation deck, Sarah noticed a group of children playing in the station's recreation area. They came from a dozen different species, children of diplomats, traders, and military personnel. Unlike the carefully supervised interactions of the old days, these children played together naturally, learning each other's languages and customs through simple friendship. But Sarah also noticed the security guards watching over them, the medical scanners that checked everyone entering the area, and the emergency shelters built into the walls. These children would grow up knowing that peace was precious because it was fragile, that safety required vigilance, and that good intentions were not enough to prevent evil actions. They would never be as innocent as Maria's generation had been, but they would be safer. Sarah thought about her daughter often, wondering what she would think of the world her death had helped create. Maria had believed in peace through understanding, in the power of gentle words and patient negotiation. The galaxy Sarah had built was harder than that dream, more realistic about the capacity for evil that existed in all sentient beings. But it was also more stable, more honest, and more protective of the weak. Children from dozens of worlds could play together because human ships stood ready to defend them. Diplomats could negotiate without fear because everyone knew the consequences of breaking their agreements. Peace existed not because everyone was good, but because everyone understood the cost of being evil. As Sarah returned to her quarters, she passed the portrait that hung in the main corridor. Maria Chun, age 23, killed while protecting others during the Harmony Station massacre. Below her picture was a quote from her final diplomatic thesis. True peace comes not from the absence of conflict, but from the strength to resolve conflict justly. Sarah paused before her daughter's image, as she did every night. I hope this is what you would have wanted, sweetheart. Not the innocence you dreamed of, but something that might actually last. Outside her window, the stars shone on a galaxy that had learned a hard lesson about the nature of civilization. Peace was not something that happened naturally when good people made good choices. Peace was something that had to be built, maintained, and defended by those strong enough to protect it and wise enough to use their strength responsibly. Humanity had proven they could be both strong and wise. The rest of the galaxy was still learning, but they were learning under the protection of those who had paid the price for that knowledge. In the memorial garden, flowers from 47 worlds bloomed together in careful harmony.